Why even the US Navy can't fully open the Strait of Hormuz. A narrow strip of water is quietly controlling global oil prices. It is shaping shipping decisions. It is influencing governments. And it is testing the limits of the most powerful navy in the world. That place is the Strait of Hormuz, a thin line between Iran and Oman. But in reality, this corridor carries nearly 1/5 of the world's oil supply. And in recent days, that flow has not stopped, but it has become uncertain. Shipping patterns are shifting. Insurance costs are rising. And military presence in the region is increasing, which creates a strange paradox. The most powerful navy in history is present, yet it cannot fully guarantee normal, stable flow. Why can't overwhelming force simply secure this route? Why the Strait of Hormuz matters. The Strait of Hormuz is a narrow maritime passage between Iran and Oman. It connects the Persian Gulf to the Arabian Sea and then to the wider Indian Ocean. On a global map, it looks small, but in economic terms, it carries enormous weight. At its narrowest point, it is only around 33 kilometers wide. And the actual shipping lanes used by large tankers are much narrower than that. In practical terms, massive energy flows are moving through a very tight corridor. That narrowness is not a detail. That is the source of its power. Roughly 1/5 of the world's oil consumption passes through this single route. In volume terms, that is close to 20 to 21 million barrels of oil every day moving through this corridor. Countries like Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates and Qatar depend heavily on this route to move energy out to global markets. Together, these producers send roughly 18 to 20 million barrels of oil per day through the Strait of Hormuz. Saudi Arabia alone contributes around 6 to 7 million barrels per day moving through or near this route. Iraq adds approximately 3 to 4 million barrels per day, most of it exported from its southern terminals. The United Arab Emirates contributes close to 3 million barrels per day, while Kuwait exports around 2 to 2.5 million barrels per day through this corridor. And Qatar, while smaller in oil volume, plays a critical role in gas, exporting a large share of the world's liquefied natural gas through this same narrow passage. This is not just regional supply. This is a concentrated energy output feeding the global system. And on the other side, major industrial economies, especially China, India, Japan, and South Korea, depend heavily on these flows coming in. China is the largest single importer of oil passing through Hormuz, accounting for roughly 35 to 40% of total flows. India follows, receiving around 15 to 20%, while Japan and South Korea each depend on the Gulf for a significant share of their energy needs, often more than half of their oil imports. For these economies, this is not just supply, it is structural dependency. The pattern is simple. Energy moves out of the Gulf and into the heart of Asia. This means any disruption isn't just a regional Middle East problem. It is a systemic global failure. Why? Because oil isn't just fuel for cars. It is the invisible foundation of modern life. Aviation and shipping. Global trade stops moving. Manufacturing. Factories lose power and raw materials. Agriculture. Fertilizer production collapses, threatening the food supply. Everything else, from plastics in your pocket to the electricity in your home. But here is the critical insight. The world doesn't wait for the strait to actually close. The system reacts to the possibility of it. The moment a missile is fired, the world pays. It shows up in soaring insurance premiums, market uncertainty, and immediate inflation. When 20% of the world's energy is squeezed through one narrow corridor, the threat is just as powerful as the act. In the oil market, expectation is reality. Even if not a single drop of oil is blocked today, the mere fear of a disruption tomorrow sends prices skyrocketing. Look at what happened this week. Brent crude is pushing toward record highs, currently surging past $110 per barrel, with analysts warning of a spike to $140. Why? Not because the world suddenly ran out of oil, but because markets reacted to a new wave of military escalation, including reported drone strikes on Kuwaiti energy infrastructure and disputed reports of a US fighter jet brought down over Iran. The market doesn't wait for a disaster, it prices in the disaster in advance. The infrastructure of fear. This is where the Strait of Hormuz becomes a global trigger. You don't have to close the strait to break the system. You only need to make it unpredictable. When tensions rise, a friction chain begins. Insurance spikes. Shipping companies see their premiums jump 10x overnight. The ghost fleet. We are now seeing shadow tankers using secret codes and yuan payments just to bypass the chaos, adding massive hidden costs to every barrel. Strategic detours. Ships take the long way around Africa, adding weeks to delivery and burning more fuel just to get there. These aren't just shipping problems, they are cost of living problems. You might think, my country doesn't get oil from the Middle East, so I'm safe. Wrong. Oil is a global commodity. If China or India can't get their 6 million barrels from the Gulf, they don't just stop manufacturing. They go to the North Sea or the US and outbid everyone else for their oil. This creates a bidding war for the entire planet. In Europe, it hits the heating bill. In Asia, it hits the factory floor. In America, it hits the gas pump. The Strait of Hormuz is the world's most sensitive economic nerve. When Iran or the US twitches in that 33-kilometer corridor, the entire global nervous system feels the pain. Because in a world connected by energy, a disruption in one place is a price hike everywhere. The logic of the ghost strait. Iran understands one thing better than almost anyone else. You do not have to physically close a choke point to control it. Its strategy is not about defeating the US Navy in a conventional naval war. It is about something more subtle, making the Strait of Hormuz so dangerous, so uncertain, and so expensive that the global economy starts restricting itself. That is the real logic of pressure in Hormuz. Not total blockade. Selective denial. Because commercial shipping does not operate like a warship. A navy can move through danger. A tanker depends on a more fragile system, insurance, navigation, confidence, crew willingness, predictable routing, acceptable financial risk. And once those begin to weaken, the strait starts to lose its normal function, even if no one officially declares it closed. That is what we are seeing again now. In recent days, the pressure has not come only from missiles or military threats. It has also come from rising war risk costs, shipping hesitation, and growing uncertainty around how safe normal transit really is. And that matters because uncertainty itself is a weapon. If insurers raise premiums sharply, some operators delay. If captains lose confidence, some ships reroute. If companies believe the next strike could be worse, they start making defensive decisions before the full crisis arrives. And once enough of those decisions begin to stack up, the effect becomes global. This is the real insight. Hormuz does not need to be sealed shut to disrupt trade. It only needs to become a zone of uncertainty. Because while the US Navy is built to fight through physical threats, global markets are built around confidence. And when that confidence breaks, the strait starts controlling the world long before it is ever fully closed. Why the US Navy can't just fix? At first, the answer seems obvious. If the strait is under threat, just send in the world's most powerful navy. And on paper, that makes sense. The US Navy has staggering power. It can deploy massive aircraft carriers, strike missile sites, and overwhelm any direct military challenger. But here is the catch. Hormuz is not a normal naval problem. It is a geography trap. In the open ocean, a powerful navy has room to move and strike from hundreds of miles away. But in Hormuz, the space is so tight that the strongest navy in history is forced to play on Iran's home turf. Iran isn't trying to win a traditional naval battle. They are playing a game of asymmetric chaos. The anti-navy strategy. Iran has spent decades building what experts call an anti-navy. You don't need a billion-dollar destroyer to stop a tanker when you have these three tools. Invisible mines. This is the Navy's ultimate nightmare. US is struggling with limited mine-clearing assets. A single $20,000 influence mine anchored to the seafloor can disable a $2 billion ship. Clearing them is slow, dangerous work you can't do while being shot at from the coast. The drone swarm. Iran can launch hundreds of cheap kamikaze drones from anywhere along its 2,000-kilometer coastline. The US Navy has to be right 100% of the time to protect a tanker. The drones only have to be lucky once. Electronic spoofing. This week, over 1,100 vessels in the Gulf reported massive GPS interference. Ships are appearing on radar as if they are miles inland or moving at impossible speeds. When a captain can no longer trust his sensors, he stops the ship, no matter how many warships are nearby. The limits of force. Here is the simple truth. A warship passing through the strait does not mean the strait is open. For this waterway to function, it needs confidence. The US Navy can escort some ships. It can strike some launch sites. But it cannot escort 2,000 tankers a month. The moment the Navy starts a massive bombing campaign to clear the coast, the war escalates. Insurance companies don't see a cleared path. They see a war zone. They raise premiums even higher, and the flow of oil stays choked because the risk is simply too high. The real answer to why can't the US just open it is because disruption is cheaper than reassurance. Opening the strait isn't just about blowing things up. It's about making a 300,000-ton oil tanker feel safe. In a 33-kilometer wide corridor filled with mines, drones, and GPS jamming, safety is the one thing no navy can manufacture. The US can win a battle in Hormuz, but as we are seeing this week, they are currently losing the battle for stability. The wider impact. Why Hormuz does not stay in Hormuz. At first glance, Europe seems distant. It doesn't rely heavily on oil flowing directly through the Strait of Hormuz. Most of Europe's supply comes from the US, Norway, and Kazakhstan. Logically, they should be safe. But the global system doesn't work on direct lines. It works on shared consequences. In the global oil market, you don't just import a product, you import its price. When the strait becomes unstable, the entire global pool of oil shrinks. Europe has to outbid everyone else for the remaining supply. Even if not a single drop of Middle Eastern oil reaches London or Berlin, the price hike arrives instantly. The China factor. The prepared giant. For China, the situation is different. They are the largest importer of oil passing through the strait. Their massive industrial engine depends on this constant pulse. But China is not a passive victim. They have spent years preparing for this exact vulnerability by building the world's largest strategic petroleum reserve. By diversifying their suppliers and investing in land-based pipelines from Russia, China has cushioned itself. They are exposed, but they are also the most prepared player on the board. The Russia factor: profit from chaos. Unlike almost every other player, Russia does not need the Strait of Hormuz. Their oil moves through entirely different routes. When the strait is choked, global supply drops and prices soar. For Russia, this is a double win. 1. Higher revenue. They earn significantly more for every barrel they sell elsewhere. 2. Strategic leverage. Desperate countries in Europe and Asia suddenly turn to Russia as the safe alternative. In this system, a crisis for the West is often a massive opportunity for the East. The invisible impact: your daily life. Now step away from the governments and the tankers. Look at the real impact: the everyday person. This entire geopolitical struggle doesn't stay in the Middle East. It reaches your home. When oil prices rise globally, it creates a shockwave of inflation. It hits your fuel tank. It hits your grocery bill because transport and fertilizer costs rise. It hits your electricity bill. Someone sitting in Delhi, New York, or London feels this conflict not as a war, but as a higher cost of living. Because in the modern world, power is no longer just about who has the most ships. It's about who can influence the system. Control is not about dominance or firepower. It's about the ability to remove uncertainty. The United States can operate in the region. It can strike targets. It can protect some ships, but it cannot manufacture safety. It cannot erase the narrow geography, the $20,000 mines, the drone swarms, or the 33x insurance spikes. As long as those elements exist, the system remains fragile. Iran doesn't need to defeat the US Navy in a battle. They only need to make the world afraid of the route. Because in the modern world, the battlefield isn't just the water. The system itself is the battlefield. Thank you for watching. If this inspired you, hit subscribe, like, comment, and share. Be part of our journey. Beyond identities, beyond borders, beyond divisions, our destiny is one. You are watching Next Horizon Global.